The mahogany conference table in that high-rise office overlooking downtown Chicago felt miles wide. On one side sat a woman whose elegance was as sharp as a razor blade. She didn't look like someone preparing for a wedding. She looked like a CEO finalizing a hostile corporate takeover. At 28, she had built a reputation in the city's elite real estate circles as someone who never lost. Her posture was perfect, her expression completely unreadable. Next to her sat an older man in a bespoke charcoal suit, his eyes pointedly fixed on his leather folder, deliberately avoiding any eye contact with me. He was one of the most expensive asset protection attorneys in Illinois, and right now he looked deeply uncomfortable. Across from them sat a man who had spent the last 3 years believing he was building a partnership based on mutual trust. Myself. I am a 32-year-old architectural engineer. My job is to look at blueprints, find the structural flaws before the foundation is poured, and reinforce them. But as I stared at the document slid across the polished wood, I realized I had completely missed the fatal flaw in my own life. "My assets stay entirely separate," she said, her voice smooth, devoid of any hesitation. She leaned back, crossing her legs, tapping a manicured fingernail against her designer handbag. "Let's be realistic. Your past divorce says more than enough about your judgment when it comes to long-term commitments. I'm simply protecting what's mine. It's nothing personal." Her words were meant to cut. They were meant to provoke an emotional reaction, a defensive outburst, or perhaps a plea for fairness. She expected me to argue, to remind her of the thousands of dollars I had already poured into our upcoming wedding, or how I had willingly blended our lives. But I didn't flinch. I looked at her attorney. The man still wouldn't look up. He knew exactly what was hidden in the fine print of the broader financial disclosures attached to that document. He knew what she was trying to pull. "Smart," I said calmly. I picked up the heavy fountain pen. Without a single second of hesitation, I signed my name at the bottom of the page with a fluid, unbroken stroke. She smiled, a triumphant, satisfied smirk that told me she believed she had just won the ultimate game of chess before the board was even fully set. She thought she had completely tied my hands, leaving herself entirely insulated while holding all the cards. What she didn't realize, what her expensive attorney hadn't properly warned her about, was that by signing that specific document under those exact terms, she hadn't trapped me. She had just handed me the precise legal axe I needed to chop the ground out from right beneath her feet. I was totally unaware of how dark her betrayal truly ran at that moment. But as I smiled back at her, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. She had just signed the death warrant of her own golden empire, and the clock was already ticking. To understand how we ended up in that high-rise office, signing a weaponized prenuptial agreement, we have to look back at the weeks leading up to that afternoon. A structure doesn't collapse from a single gust of wind. It falls because the internal supports have been quietly rotting away for months. Our story truly began to unravel during a dinner at a high-end restaurant in the heart of Boston, where her family resided. We were planning a massive, exclusive New Year's family trip to a luxury resort in the mountains of Aspen. Because my architectural firm had just secured a massive federal contract, I had offered to fully fund the entire excursion: 5-star lodging, private ski instructors, and first-class flights for her, her mother, and her siblings. It was my gift to my future in-laws. But as the appetizers were cleared, she slid her phone into her purse and looked at me with a cold, detached expression. "About the Aspen trip," she started, swirling the wine in her glass. "I need you to skip it. You should stay behind in Chicago." I paused, setting my fork down. "Excuse me? The trip is in 2 weeks. It's fully paid for. Why would I stay behind?" "My mother wants my ex-fiancé to be there," she replied, completely casual, as if she were updating me on a weather report. "They've known him for a decade. He's like a son to my mom, and he's going through a really difficult time right now. If you're there, it's just going to make the family dynamics incredibly awkward. Don't make a scene out of it. Just stay home. Happy New Year." The sheer audacity of the demand should have caused a scene. She was asking me to sit in an empty apartment over the holidays while the woman I was marrying spent a luxury vacation that I funded with the man she used to love, all to satisfy her mother's nostalgia. I looked into her eyes, searching for a hint of guilt, a flicker of hesitation. There was none. She genuinely believed that because she had social leverage, I would simply swallow my pride to keep the peace. She thought my quiet nature was a sign of weakness. "Okay," I said quietly. "Happy New Year." She blinked, slightly surprised by how easily I had folded, but her expression quickly replaced itself with that familiar, smug satisfaction. "Thank you for understanding," she said. But I wasn't understanding. I was calculating. The next morning, she departed for the airport. I didn't drive her. I watched her Uber pull away from our lakeside condo from the kitchen window. The moment the car cleared the gates, I sat down at my desk and made a single, quiet phone call to a corporate concierge service I had utilized for years. Cancel the primary guest access for the Aspen luxury suite reservation under my corporate card, I instructed the agent. Reroute the master billing. Leave the rooms active for the family, but strip away all premium amenities, the private dining access, and the ski passes. And effective immediately, remove her name as an authorized user from my primary accounts. While she was in the air, flying across the country, I began a deep dive into our shared digital footprint. I am a man of details. When you design buildings, a miscalculation of half an inch can bring a roof down, and that was when I discovered the first major anomaly. 2 months prior, she had asked me to co-sign on a short-term liquidity transfer. She claimed her real estate firm needed a temporary bridge loan of a massive sum, $300,000, to close a commercial property deal in downtown Seattle. She had assured me it was just a formality, a brief holding maneuver, and that the funds would remain in a shared holding account that required both of our digital signatures to release permanently. Because I trusted her completely at the time, I had approved the transfer from my personal investment portfolio. But as I reviewed the ledger logs that morning, I noticed something her high-priced lawyer hadn't mentioned at our prenup meeting later that month. When she set up the holding account, she had made a critical, arrogant mistake. In her rush to structure the account to give herself sole administrative access over the funds, she had utilized a boilerplate corporate template from her own firm. She unknowingly left a standard 72-hour revocation clause active for the originating depositor, me, in the event that a formal partnership or marriage agreement was amended or delayed. She was so focused on locking me out of her future assets that she completely failed to realize she hadn't legally secured the massive chunk of my capital she had already moved. She assumed the transfer was permanent. She assumed I would never look at the underlying code of the financial contract. I didn't touch the money yet. I left it sitting there, like a trap waiting for the right moment to spring. A few days later, she returned from her trip acting as though nothing had happened. She was filled with stories about the mountain air, entirely omitting any mention of her ex. I played the part of the dutiful, oblivious partner perfectly. Then came the incident with the wedding planner. We were sitting in a lavish bridal boutique in North Chicago, reviewing the final guest list with our coordinator. The planner was reviewing the seating arrangements when my fiancée suddenly reached out and tapped a blank space on the diagram. "We need to add one more seat at the primary family table," she announced. The planner looked up, pen poised. "Of course. Who is the guest?" My fiancée didn't look at me. She kept her eyes on the paper. "It's my ex. I want to invite him to our wedding." The planner's pen literally dropped out of her hand, rolling across the glass table. The silence in the boutique became deafening. The planner glanced between the two of us, her face turning a bright shade of crimson. "Oh, I see. For closure?" my fiancée said, turning her head to look at me, her voice dripping with a forced, sweet sincerity that made my stomach turn. "I need to see him one last time in this context. It will help all of us move forward. Closure is incredibly important, don't you think?" I stared at her. This was the second time she was pushing him into our life, testing my boundaries, seeing how much humiliation I would tolerate before breaking. She wanted to see how much power she truly held over me. "You're right," I said, a calm, chilling smile spreading across my face. "Closure is incredibly important." I turned to the wedding planner, who was sweating under her designer blouse. "In fact, let's make sure everything is finalized as quickly as possible. Let's move the entire wedding date up by 2 full months. We don't need to wait until the spring. Let's do it now, while the momentum is high." My fiancé's eyes widened in surprise, a flash of genuine excitement crossing her face. She thought I was accelerating the timeline because I was desperate to marry her. She thought she had broken my resolve completely. "Are you serious? Can we pull that off?" "Absolutely," the planner stammered, eager to break the tension. "We have an opening due to a cancellation next month." "Perfect," I said. "And as for his invitation, don't worry about mailing it to his old apartment. I happen to know his current address. Send his invitation directly to his current girlfriend's residence in Boston. I'm sure she would love to accompany him." The color instantly drained from my fiancé's face. The silence that followed that statement said absolutely everything I needed to know. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. She realized I knew far more than I was letting on, but her arrogance blinded her to the scale of the trap I was building around her. She thought she was playing a game of social manipulation. She had absolutely no idea that I was already rewriting the entire script of her life, and by the time she realized what I had truly done, it would be far too late to save herself. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. But when they show you a second and third time, you stop trying to fix the structure. You prepare for the controlled demolition. The final straw broke on a rainy Tuesday evening in November. I had returned home early from a structural site inspection in downtown Chicago. The condo was dark, save for the ambient lights of the city bleeding through the floor-to-ceiling windows. As I walked down the hallway toward our bedroom, I heard a muted conversation. My fiancée was standing by the window, her phone pressed tightly to her ear. She was talking to her lifelong best friend, a woman who had enabled her deceptive behavior since their college days in Miami. I stopped just outside the doorway, stepping into the deep shadows of the corridor. If he asks, just say I'm at your place studying the new property portfolios for the Northwest Project, my fiancée whispered into the receiver, her voice filled with a sharp, frantic energy. He's getting suspicious about my late hours. No, he's at work until 9. Just cover for me like usual. What she didn't know was that her best friend wasn't at her apartment in Miami. She was currently in Chicago, having arrived that afternoon for a surprise bridal shower planning session. In fact, her best friend was sitting right downstairs in our building's common lounge, having texted me an hour earlier, asking if she could drop off some sample materials. I didn't confront my fiancé in the bedroom. I didn't yell. I quietly stepped back down the hallway, exited the front door without making a sound, and took the elevator down to the lounge. Her best friend was sitting on a leather sofa, looking down at her phone with a deeply guilty expression as she listened to my fiancé lie. I walked up smoothly, completely calm, and sat down directly beside her. She jumped, nearly dropping her device. "Oh, you're here," she stammered, her face turning pale. "Give me the phone," I said, my voice deadpan, completely devoid of anger. She looked at me, terrified of the absolute lack of emotion in my eyes, and slowly handed the device over. I pressed it to my ear. My fiancé was still talking on the other end, detailing the lies she wanted her friend to repeat. "He doesn't need to ask," I said quietly into the receiver. The line went completely silent. I handed the phone back to her friend, stood up, and walked back to the elevators. I didn't return to the apartment that night. I checked into a hotel down the street under my firm's corporate account. It was time to pull the pin on the grenade. The next morning was the infamous prenuptial meeting I mentioned earlier, the one where she demanded total separation of her assets and sneered at my past judgment. She thought she was delivering the final blow to my financial leverage. She thought that by forcing me to sign that document, she was protecting her real estate empire while keeping me firmly under her thumb. But remember that 72-hour revocation clause she had unknowingly left active in the commercial bridge loan agreement? The moment I left that attorney's office, signed prenup in hand, I drove straight to the headquarters of the private banking institution that held the $300,000 joint escrow account. I presented the signed prenuptial agreement to the branch director, based on the amended asset separation terms explicitly detailed in Section 4 of this signed agreement, I explained, sliding the paperwork across the desk. And utilizing the active depositor revocation clause in the original escrow contract, I am officially reversing the temporary bridge transfer. Return the $300,000 to my private portfolio immediately. The banker reviewed the documents, nodded efficiently, and began typing on his terminal. "Everything is in order, sir. The funds have been successfully pulled back. The shared account is now collapsed." She had assumed that money was securely locked in her corporate project. She had already leveraged that capital to secure a secondary multi-million-dollar loan for a massive development project in downtown Austin, Texas. By pulling that foundational $300,000 out from under her, the entire financial pyramid she had constructed was about to face a catastrophic, unrecoverable margin call. But I wasn't finished. I called our wedding planner one last time. "Cancel the entire venue reservation for next month," I told her. "Keep the deposit. I don't care about the loss. Issue a formal cancellation notice to all vendors, the caterers, the decorators, the musicians. But do not send out a general cancellation email to the guest list. I will handle the notifications personally." That evening, I returned to our condo while she was out celebrating her presumed legal victory with her real estate colleagues. I packed every single one of my belongings into 4 large suitcases. I removed my name from the lease of the luxury condo, paid out the early termination fee using a separate account, and left only one thing behind on the kitchen island. It was her heavy, white silk wedding binder, the book where she meticulously organized every detail of her perfect, high society life. I opened the binder to the very first page, right over the seating chart, where she had arrogantly placed her ex-fiancé. I placed a sleek black leather folder directly on top of it. Inside that folder was the certified bank reversal receipt showing the loss of her $300,000, a copy of the venue cancellation contract, and the legal termination of our lease. When she walked through that door later that night, expecting to find a defeated, compliant husband waiting for her, she walked into an empty, echoing apartment. The silence of the rooms was deafening. She dropped her keys onto the counter, her eyes instantly falling on the open wedding binder. As she stepped forward and opened the black folder, her entire body went rigid. The air left her lungs in a sharp, ragged gasp. She froze at what was sitting inside. She realized with a wave of absolute horror that the quiet man she had spent months manipulating hadn't just walked away. He had systematically dismantled her entire reality while she was out celebrating her own arrogance. She tried to call me frantically, her phone lighting up the dark room over and over again, but my number was already disconnected. She was totally unaware that this was only the first wave of the collapse, and the true cost of her betrayal was about to land with a shattering force. There is a specific type of blindness that affects people who believe they are smarter than everyone else in the room. They never look down to see if the bridge they are walking on has already been cut. 2 weeks later, the final act of the demolition played out exactly where the disrespect had first become intolerable: the luxury mountain resort in Aspen. My ex-fiancé, her mother, her siblings, and yes, her ex-fiancé, had arrived at the five-star resort via a first-class flight that had been booked weeks prior. Because I had canceled the automated corporate card authorizations but left the base room reservations active to avoid a premature alert, they were able to check into their rooms. They believed they had pulled off the ultimate social coup. They were settling into a multi-thousand-dollar holiday vacation, funded entirely by the man they had excluded from the trip. It was New Year's Eve. The atmosphere in the resort lobby was opulent. A live jazz quartet played near a massive, roaring stone fireplace. Hundreds of wealthy guests dressed in formal attire were gathering, holding crystal flutes of champagne, counting down the final hours of the year. My ex-fiancé stood near the center of the grand lobby, wearing a stunning designer dress, laughing with her mother, while her ex-fiancé stood closely by her side, his arm casually resting near her waist. They were the picture of high society perfection. As the crowd in the lobby began the thunderous countdown to midnight, a man in a crisp winter uniform walked through the revolving glass doors of the resort. He wasn't a guest. He was a local private courier, carrying a thick, waterproof courier pouch. He scanned the crowded room efficiently, his eyes locking onto the distinct description he had been provided. He walked directly past the cheering crowds, stepping up straight to my ex-fiancée, just as the clock struck midnight. "Are you the individual named here?" the courier asked loudly over the din of the celebration, presenting a digital signature pad. She blinked, startled, her champagne glass pausing mid-air. "Yes. Why?" "You've been formally served," the man said deadpan. He handed her the heavy courier pouch, turned on his heel, and vanished back into the winter night. Her mother frowned, leaning in. "What is that, darling? Is it a surprise gift from him? Did he send a driver?" With trembling fingers, my ex-fiancée tore open the seal of the pouch. She pulled out the contents under the bright, festive lights of the luxury lobby. The first document was a formal legal summons from the state banking commissioner and her own firm's primary lenders. Because the $300,000 had been legally pulled back due to the explicit terms of the prenuptial agreement she had insisted on signing, her commercial real estate deal in Seattle had collapsed 48 hours prior. The sudden asset deficit had triggered an automatic cross-default clause across her entire Texas portfolio. Her firm was facing an immediate, catastrophic corporate audit, and her personal assets, the very ones she had fought so viciously to keep separate, were being frozen as collateral by the bank. But it was the second document that broke her completely. It was a printed stack of formal letters that had been delivered that very same evening to every single person on our 300-person wedding guest list, including her professional partners, her elite clients, her extended family, and most importantly, the current girlfriend of the ex-fiancé standing right beside her in Aspen. The letter was brief, elegant, and devastatingly precise. Due to a fundamental structural failure in the core foundation of our relationship, the upcoming wedding has been permanently canceled. The venue has been dissolved, and the assets have been reclaimed by their rightful owner. For those seeking closure regarding this sudden decision, please direct all inquiries to the groom's former partner, who is currently celebrating the new year in Aspen alongside the guest she deemed more important than her future husband. Have a phenomenal new year." Suddenly, her phone began to vibrate violently in her clutch purse. Then her mother's phone lit up. Then her brother's. Then her ex-fiancé's phone began ringing incessantly. His current girlfriend back in Boston, calling to unleash hell after receiving her custom-addressed invitation package. The color completely drained from my ex-fiancé's face, leaving her a ghostly, hollow white amidst the glittering confetti falling from the ceiling. The people around her began to step away, whispering as they checked their own screens, realizing the scandalous truth of why they were standing in that room. At that exact same moment, 2,000 miles away, I was sitting in a quiet, first-class cabin of an international flight bound for the coast of New Zealand. My laptop was open on the tray table, showing a simple, clean interface of my personal investment portfolio. The $300,000 was safely resting back in my primary account, ready to fund a brand new architectural venture I had planned for the upcoming spring. I looked out the window as the plane climbed high above the clouds, leaving the twinkling lights of the American skyline far behind me. I took a slow, deep breath of the clean, pressurized air. There is an old saying in my profession: you cannot build a beautiful structure on a foundation of lies and expect it to stand. Eventually, the weight of the deceit will bring the entire thing crashing down on the heads of those who designed it. I closed my laptop, leaned my seat back into the darkness of the cabin, and smiled. The structure had cleared. The site was completely clean, and for the first time in a very long time, the future looked absolutely flawless.